Everyone, thanks for joining us on a rainy day where there's no better to be inside and talking about MDR with the outside weather. Even if it wasn't that, I'm really fired up to have this fireside chat with Dave Merkel, who is a fascinating founder and CEO and has built a truly extraordinary company in Expel. We're going to spend about 25 minutes in a pretty casual conversation. A lot of times the most interesting parts of this are the great questions that all of you have. So if you have questions along the way, raise your hand. We'll send some microphones around and start with that. But Dave Merkel is the co-founder and CEO of Expel. As folks probably know, it's a cybersecurity company specializing in managed detection and response. I think one of the more interesting plays right now, given the increasing security landscape. Before founding Expel, he had significant positions at Mandiant and FireEye, and with the really interesting piece where we talked about our shared Department of Defense background, was a special agent in the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, doing cybersecurity before cybersecurity was all the rage, so it was pretty prescient for that. So Dave, again, thanks for making time to join us.
Yeah, no, happy to be here.
So maybe we could start with your unique background, which means not only do you have product market fit, you have founder product market fit to found and lead a company like Expel. You have these roles in federal law enforcement, leading positions at Mandiant and FireEye. I guess, when was the moment you realized that I need to start Expel? There is a real need for this company.
Well, first I said after I left FireEye, I will never do this again. So that's actually what created the karma. So I left FireEye middle of 2015, along with my would-be co-founders. It was not to found Expel. I did literally say I'd never do it again. And then fast forward, and Yannick and Justin had been looking at what are they going to do next, and I was not going to do anything next. And then, of all things, I saw a tweet, which I'm still going to call them tweets, and I'll go down swinging, from Rick Holland, who used to be an analyst at Forrester. He covered the stuff I did at Mandiant and FireEye, and he basically said the managed security landscape's the service equivalent of a taxi cab, and it's ripe for disruption. And I read it, which is sort of a miracle, because I was kind of on cyber detox, and it kept burning in my brain. I started talking to Yannick and Justin about it, and then we started getting conviction that, yeah, nobody is doing this the right way to really go after that managed market in a way that both creates a valuable company, so not a services business, but a software, technology company, and actually solves the problem in a differentiated way. We just saw a bunch of bits and bobs, and we thought, you know what, you can go after this thing and really redefine this space. So we got off the bench and went for it.
So when you talk about redefining the space, I mean, I know when I'm advising cybersecurity companies on M&A and IPO transactions, there is a real overlapping group of security products and not enough security talent to effectively manage all that's going on. I mean, that's a pretty standard piece. So what is Expel's solution to the problem? What do you think is your secret sauce?
I want to touch on the talent thing just a little bit, because sometimes folks are like, well, eventually we'll solve the talent problem. I'm like, you won't, because there's three axes that are moving. There's the attack surface you're protecting, which changes functionality all the time, like Amazon changes AWS every reInvent, right? There's the technology you use to protect yourself. That's constantly shifting in response to the attack surface, and then the attacker shifts. And so you've got these three things moving, and at any point in time, security talent has to encompass all three of those things, and so it's actually a shifting window. So security talent is never fully up to date because of that dynamic. Now, the thing that I saw two things. One was nobody was taking the big swing. All of us, to include us at Mandiant, that had built a managed offering on top of advanced security technology, had carved off a use case that was specific to some other part of the business. I had an endpoint product. We built EDR before EDR was cool. I had a managed offering on my endpoint. CrowdStrike does the same thing. SentinelOne does the same thing. Or you're focusing on a particular class of technologies to narrow the window of what you have to support. Red Canary did that. ReliaQuest did that. But if you're a CISO at a modern enterprise, your security stack is this tall. and you want visibility across all of it, and you want visibility across on-prem, cloud, cloud SaaS, and whatever the heck else comes next. You don't want to hear, I don't support that, or you have to change that product out. So nobody was solving that problem. And then secondly, they were all services businesses, meaning scale and quality kind of do this in a services company. Even if you build technology around your services business, there's no foundation. There's no bedrock for you to mount your innovation on top of. And we said, you know what, if we could get the money up front, we could build that foundation. What that leads to over time is scale and quality, so differentiated customer experience. Customer 500 and customer 5 get exactly the same thing, or sometimes better because you've got more data now to operate with, and high gross margin, SaaS gross margins, so a SaaS approach to going after a legacy services industry. And so that's the tack we took.
And that's a fascinating point about that margin question, because the conventional wisdom has been the problems that you're trying to solve, the talent sources, this talent shortage, understanding the SaaS, the security stack, those are not software gross margins that will get investors excited about doing that. So how did you do that? Like, how are you able to generate these very attractive gross margins that a lot of public market investors and later stage investors want, while solving what's fundamentally a services problem that you talked about?
Yeah, the trick is you need software to solve the software only pieces, and nobody does that because they start providing service first. We already understood what the problem looked like, and so we had an architecture in our mind on how to solve the integration problem with all the different technologies that customers have. You solve that with tech, not with people. Security signal processing in a way where the robots are doing the work, not the humans. Investigation. So anytime you hear like a security practitioner talk about playbooks, those are repetitive steps in response to a scenario. That should be software. So we built that infrastructure at the beginning. We also built instrumentation underneath the whole thing so we could watch what customers are doing, what their environment is doing, and what our own people are doing, so that as things become less efficient because something changes, you can see that and you can push that back down into the software stack. The other thing is, if you stop and think about, okay, well, how do we get the all-knowing, all AI, self-driving SOC? The same way you get a self-driving car, you build a car, you build instrumentation, and you put an F1 driver in there, not my son. Not that he's a bad driver, but it's not an F1 driver. And then you measure over time and you iterate features, and that gives you, adaptive cruise control and lane change and stop sign and, CAT, whatever the feature might be. And so we had that picture at the start of the journey, and it proved out. We're mid-70s gross margin, ARR per SOC analyst is up and to the right, has been since the beginning. Alerts per analyst is up and to the right. And if you saw the Forrester Wave last week, we, yet again, are the very best in the business.
That is great. Well, look, the point the analogy to the self-driving car, or the completely terrifying idea of having our teenage son or daughter inside of Formula One, brings to mind the obvious point of artificial intelligence.
Sure.
No tech conference is allowed to exist without talking about AI. Now is the time we'll get into AI. So as you talk about these gross margins and the intersection between automation and really great security talent, what is Expel's AI strategy? Okay. And how are you thinking about this? Is agentic AI part of it? Are you thinking about other types of areas, or how does it look?
Do we get to do shots every time you say AI?
I think basically Jamie has told me that I get an extra Diet Coke for every time
that's good.
I talk about it, and like a bonus Coke Zero for agentic, I guess. So
first off, if we go back to origin of the company, we were utilizing sort of state-of-the-art technologies at that time in that chain of technology that I mentioned. For example, application of machine learning models, both supervised and unsupervised, to identify bad things. We built substrate at the beginning for our platform to communicate with humans, not just in the platform, but via Slack and Teams, and behave as basically a virtual SOC analyst. And we built in the capability for that same robot to be a co-pilot for our operators, right? So all those concepts pre-existed like at the beginning of time. Now, as we take a look at the kinds of things that are happening in the space around, generative AI is a clean, simple example. I already have the hooks necessary for platform to talk to customers, and they're used to it. I already have the example for platform to co-pilot with my analysts, and they're used to it. So we're able to just take, pick a large language model, take our data set, find interesting ways to use it, and just layer it on top of the capabilities that already exist. Now do my customers care? No, my job is to generate the outcome. How is my problem? Do I care? Yeah, because every little thing that robot does that a human doesn't is gross margin. And so we're adapting those technologies now. We do have to be careful. Like, it's not the same as fire up Chat GPT and have it hallucinate at you. I can't have a security operations platform hallucinate to my customers. Like, that's not going to work.
And what's the risk of that right now? Because that is
high.
something like, so what's the risk, and then how do you mitigate that risk? Because we obviously can't have that happen.
Yeah, so right now the risk is high, and the advantage we have is because I have this platform that delivers the value, and I do have a 24/7 security operations center that is highly performant, I can put humans at the end to proctor what the AI is doing so that we can figure out what are the safe things for us to do and what are the unsafe things for us to do. Because I can't have it happen. We actually were with two of our larger customers recently during their QBR, and they were asking for our AI strategy because they're going to ask, and we outlined it. And they said, okay, cool. So you're still ultimately the proctor of the security outcome you're generating for us. You're security ops folks. And I said, yes. And they went, oh, thank God. So there's some customer acknowledgement of a need for maturation of the tech before we can really put the throttle down.
Right. I mean, or from your old Air Force days, it is such a critical piece. You need to have a man in the loop at this stage, or around the loop. I don't know how you think about it. And so otherwise, we're just not at that point to assume that risk for large enterprise.
That's right. But still, again, there's still a bunch of stuff we can do. I mean, we were already automatically writing reports and attack diagrams and all that stuff without humans. Now I can do that even better, and now the human is editing. I'll take that every single day of the week, as opposed to having to create that stuff from the get-go. So still some tremendous things. Also helps with things like language and translation. There's just a bunch of stuff there that plays very well to the way we set up our business.
That's great. I want to make sure, does anyone have questions in the audience? I want to make sure to be thoughtful if folks are trying to get in. As you have them, please raise your hand. I want to wrap up one more piece on the AI side. Is there's a quote I saw that was interesting from your chief people officer, and who said that AI tools don't just store or transmit information. They learn from, transform, and reproduce it in ways that cascade beyond our ability to predict or control, which is one of those pieces that creates opportunities, as we talked about, but also scares the snot out of me of what's happening. So how do you think about AI, changing the cybersecurity landscape and the dangers we face? And then what's your strategy about how Expel can leverage AI to catch up in this traditional offense versus defense race that we're all used to talking about?
Yeah, there's a couple ways I think about AI in the context of risk. One is attackers just directly applying the technology. Simplistic examples are attackers crafting higher quality social engineering attacks. That's very simplistic, but very real. And so the kinds of folks that can now craft those attacks, it increase the volume of those potential attackers, by probably an amount that'd be hard to calculate. There's also the ability to build attack tools when you have lower coding experience. So, we see those kinds of things. The other way to think about risk is, okay, you're going to stuff all your content into this large language model to produce some set of business outcomes. What can I do to exploit that to try to get it to tell me something it's not supposed to or behave in a way that it shouldn't? And here's where because my job is to sit in the middle of the security investments my customer has paid for, am I going to go solve that problem directly? Probably not. Am I going to integrate with people innovating in that space that then produce that security outcome around a customer's AI investments for them? Yeah, that's exactly what we do. We integrate with everything. They're partners as opposed to competitors. And we're well positioned to do that with technology. So the second there are innovations in that space that can mitigate risk, and I don't necessarily have to invent them, I can operationalize them and get the value out for the customer.
So thinking about, there's the value of the customer that I think is a pretty compelling piece you talked about. I want to take us up a level to talk about the geopolitical context right now. I was a little...
Here we go, everybody.
Here's what gets spicy. So, hardly you can't read anything in the press with talking about the geopolitical context. So in this, sleepy world where not much is going along at all, what trends are you seeing around state-sponsored cyber activity, the impact of all the geopolitical tumult going on and how this is impacting the threats to businesses and how they defend themselves.
Yeah, what I've seen historically, both here at Expel and my time at Mandiant, is we see from nation state actors just a steady sort of rising of the tide. We have not historically seen significant hockey sticks based on changes in administration.
Interesting.
Which is interesting. I can't tell you that that's what's going to happen this time.
Have you seen hockey sticks at other transition points, or that just is not how we see state-sponsored cyber activity?
Probably the one I saw the most increase in, where there was like a real shock to the system, was, if we go back a couple of years, just the massive uptick in ransomware around the same time COVID was going on. So much so that, massive increase in prices of cyber insurance. In some cases, cyber insurance policies not being written. That has since subsided a bit, and we've kind of gotten our arms around it. So I think the advent of specific techniques drives a bit more aberrant attacker behavior as opposed to geopolitical tumult. That being said, that's from a United States perspective, and we are not directly in a war at the moment. If we ended up in a conflict with China over Taiwan, for example, then there would be at least a temporary spike, I believe, for the period of time that conflict was ongoing. But as far as sort of the cosmic background, attack radiation, if you will, it's a steady increase over time, most of the time, at least from our seat in the theater.
Right. And then and as you think about sort of where and just as a side note on that, it is interesting you mentioned, like, you see these fluctuations, which I agree are not really tied to changes in administration, but other pieces. When I was Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, we spent a lot of time thinking about how are the president's negotiations with the president of China doing pieces. Counterintuitively, I think what we later saw from open source, before one of the larger Ascending Lands meetings, we saw an uptick only to then be a new level which we could take down. Mm-hmm. So it hasn't been the way you think about. But as you think about this threat vector, the way that I think about what a company like yours is doing is you're really a critical part of American critical infrastructure. Mm-hmm. You are, I think, as important defending our nation as Patriot missiles and a lot of things from these defenses. How do you think about the relationship between the private sector and the public sector from a cybersecurity perspective?
Yeah, first, you highlight something that there's not really any other domain where, like, a private commercial interest in enterprise is on the absolute front line for protection against nation states. Like, you're not protecting yourself against tanks or bombs. You are protecting yourself against the equivalent of those weapons, but in the cyber domain. So that's just weird to begin with, but it's always been true. And nothing is really changing in our environment that I think is going to alter that dynamic, number one. Number two, I'd call myself extremely pensive and concerned at the moment for public-private cooperation. I think, for example, CISA had done a really good job over the past two administrations, both with things that I think are important that require national intervention, election security, and building public-private partnerships. Certainly, that's a much better approach than if we go back to the old days when a lot of that interaction was happening via law enforcement interfaces like the FBI. FBI catches bad people and spies. They don't protect infrastructure. It's not their job. Right. So, or at least their protection is intervention against spies and bad people. It's not, walking the fence and we're sitting in a foxhole. And so I thought CISA was a much better approach. I'd say right now, what's even going to happen with CISA is very concerning. Tons of people are gone. It's not clear what new leadership will do with it. So I'm concerned about something that was positive being potentially compromised. I'm also concerned when I hear things like cease cyber operations against Russia from the Secretary of Defense, because we already have an issue with there not being any consequences for cyber attacks. There just aren't. If you're operating in Russia or China or a bunch of other nations, we don't have any way to reach you. There's no way to prevent that from happening. I think all we're doing is potentially lowering the barrier to entry. I doubt Russia's going to reciprocate in response to that overture.
No, you're very right. I mean, from both our time in government, we know there is a lot that is done under the surface, which we don't telegraph our punches, we don't declassify our punches for very good reason. There is still a lot that we do, and it is a very interesting thing. Is I can't buy an F-35 on the dark web. I can't buy a nuclear weapon. I am not going to be hiring a private security contractor to defend me from having tanks roll across the North Korean and South Korean DMZ. All those things what you and your peers are doing and leading. So it is a very different piece. And and it's a small part of what the government is doing compared to what the private sector is doing.
I think that's right. So fingers crossed we see some better outcomes there, but I'm pensive would be the polite word.
So giving moving from the sense of polite to more spicy, if you were made the head of CISA or the new deputy national security advisor or cyber coordinator or any of these jobs, the government would be lucky to get you, and you could wave a magic wand, what would you do if you were in the government to accelerate the mission?
You're assuming Elon does not take my wand or fire me?
I assume that maybe you can pay for your own wand.
Okay, got it. Fair. All right, just want to make sure I understand the rules. Well, one is I would want CISA to continue what it started, and that's outreach both to large enterprises that are part of the national infrastructure, whether it's defense related or not, and the security solutions community in order to just enable dialogue. And doing that again through a non-law enforcement lens, I think that needs more energy and time put on it. I would not see cyber operations against Russia. Whatever. And then I think if I could push, I would be looking at the incentive structures that drive companies to invest effectively or not invest effectively in cybersecurity, because as many companies as there are that do, and there are many that do an excellent, excellent job, if we go take a look at any of those companies' supply chain, we can just start poking holes right through the thing. And unless we change the incentive structures, which involves likely regulation, it's going to be very, very difficult to accelerate progress there. It just is, because cyber's not free. It's a cost center, and unless you're Expel or a bank, you don't make money doing it. And so you have to use those regulatory levers if you want proactive action as opposed to reaction because you're in a given domain and your competitor got breached and now your board is paying attention for the next 6 months.
No, it's right. I mean, it's a really good point. It's a cost center, but a bank like ours, we're a 100,000 person global financial institution at Barclays. If we do not spend on cybersecurity, we certainly will pay the price, but it is a very hard thing to do for any enterprise before it becomes a problem.
Yeah, very, very, and it's hard to do it consistently as well. Sometimes it is very reactive to what's going on in the current news cycle if there's a prominent breach or what have you. So, since every business is its own front line in that conflict, if you want a higher degree of consistency, you're going to have to go demand it because the natural sort of pressures in the business won't cause it to happen for most businesses.
Exactly right. So maybe that's a good segue as we wrap up to talk about from the macro, just again to the exceptional stuff Expel has done. You have reached a great recurring revenue milestone that was sort of reported publicly. What factors do you attribute to getting there? Because that's a pretty significant thing that a lot of security companies don't hit. And how do you plan to sustain and accelerate that growth?
Yeah, well, I think in addition to we're not arrogant about very many things, but we built the best damn thing out there and we know it. So we'll start with that. The product is excellent. But I think it's also a testament to the market. Our thesis that there is broad-based, large-scale need for what we do to do it effectively is true. And so there is room for significant businesses in our space. And we executed, reasonably well against that. Good CEO. All I ever see is the list of things I screwed up. So it's flashing in front of my eyes right now. As I think about the journey from where we are to, $500 million and beyond in recurring revenue, a few things. One is, I think in this moment in time, really strong go-to-market execution is extremely critical. And people want to say, well, it's always critical. Yes, but if I go back to what it took to move product in 2019 and compare it to today, night and day. Night and day in terms of difficulty, particularly in the enterprise space. Like in 2022, CFO showed up to the security discussion, said, why do I keep increasing your budget? You just produced the same outcome. And the CFO has not left that conversation. I actually think that's good. But it means that we have to work that much harder to help the security organization in a company actually speak CFO. And it's very hit and miss. I'd say 2 to 3 out of 10 chief information security officers are good at it, and the rest just aren't because their career has been so wrapped up in the technology of attack and defense. And that's to the detriment of their ability to boil the argument down into actual dollars in the spreadsheet as opposed to abstract concepts like, but the threat and the risk, which CFO's not listening to anymore. And so really focusing in on that execution, and then also going after the global opportunity, or just over 90% of our recurring revenue now is US, and there is a global opportunity. We're going to have to see how the global dynamic plays out in terms of how American security companies are accepted in the current geopolitical situation. But that being said, we've done business in those countries before, and we will again. And I think to have the kind of growth we'd like to have, we have to execute outside of the borders of the U.S. in addition to what we've already done here at home.
Well, look, that is, I think that's a great lesson to leave us. I know I walk away from this conversation, have learned really three interesting things at least. I mean, so one, we are in an enormous geopolitical situation that the risks are continuing and the need for that is increasing more. There is an enormous opportunity to see if you take what are fundamentally human jobs and leverage the AI piece to merge them together in ways there's some pretty exceptional margins and revenue growth. But then third, as you just said at the end, is articulating that advantage to a community that still is making very difficult cost and trade-offs between different investments continues to be critical for the growth. Please join me in thanking Dave for what's been a fascinating conversation.